Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. And if you are just tuning in with me for the very first time, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm really glad you're here with me today. I am your host, Heather Carey, nutritionist, chef, mom, and a woman who has been around the block with food. I want to open up about real food in relation to health, weight, and our bodies so you can make peace with what you eat. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Real Food Stories podcast. I've had something on my mind lately, and not a little bit, but a lot, and that is navigating life as a woman in midlife and menopause. We have so much on our plate during this time of our lives with empty nesting, aging parents, our careers, our health, our hormones, just to name a few. And life can feel hard, to say the least, which is why I am so glad to have connected with my guest today, Elizabeth Cush. Elizabeth is a licensed clinical professional counselor and a woman's life coach. As a coach, Biz, as she likes to be called, helps midlife women who feel overwhelmed and unfulfilled embrace and embody their inner wise woman so that they can fully enjoy the beautiful life they've created. Biz is also the host of the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. Okay, Biz, let's just jump right in. And thank you for coming on the show today because I'm excited to talk to you. And
Thanks for having me, Heather.
sure. Why does midlife, especially for women, feel so hard sometimes? Are we a special population, or is this all about midlife, or does everyone kind of go through just feeling hard and life is hard?
Well, I feel like for me anyway, growing up, you always heard about men going through this midlife crisis and getting like a young girlfriend or a new car or something like that. But I think there's some awareness now that women go through something similar when they hit midlife. So I think it's probably a pretty common experience. But I think the added piece to that for women, one is menopause or perimenopause, right? That our bodies are physically, I was going to say disrupting, but they're changing. They are, the hormones are swirling, we're feeling differently. There's a lot going on. And then you add to that, like if you were a mother, potentially your kids are moving on to something new. You maybe if you hadn't worked, you're considering going back to work because now you have this time, or you're looking towards retirement. Like, okay, so what does that mean? Like, I'm going to be now in this space where I don't work anymore, or what am I going to do with myself then? So it's really sort of, I think for many people, midlife is a time where we're reevaluating where we were, where we are now, and where we want to be.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I feel like this time in my life, like no joke. I mean, I am reevaluating my entire life, my career, the direction I'm taking my career in, just how I see myself physically. I mean, sometimes I feel like I've almost been like split in two people, like my life before. I mean, let's call it menopause, my life before menopause, and the me I am right now. Because they just almost feel like that feels like my old life, like feels like something from like the way distant
The dark
past.
ages, right?
Yeah. And now I'm like sort of out in like the like navigating on my own. No one really prepares you for this time of your life. And there's just so much change going on. Right. With our bodies and aging parents and,
Yes.
so
Didn't even add that.
yeah, big changes. So it can feel really hard sometimes and overwhelming.
Yeah. I know for sure. I'm thinking, I hit perimenopause, or no, full menopause when I was like 47. And, that was a long time ago. I'm 64 now. But I remember just feeling just so almost lost in a way. It's like, well, one, what now? But also just physically, I didn't feel like myself anymore. Like I felt like I had brain fog. I was forgetting things. I remember a conversation with my older sister, and like I was like, I'm wondering if I have like early onset Alzheimer's, that I am just I feel so unlike myself. And she laughed. She's like, it's menopause. Like, don't worry. You're fine. And she
Mhm.
was right. Um, but yeah, it definitely can feel like a very disrupting time. But I also, looking back, it also prompted me to make a lot of changes in my life, which ended up being incredibly positive.
Yeah, so let's talk about change like that because I feel like, you could certainly, if I'm gonna be totally honest, like there's a part of me that is just like resisting like aging. Like I just want like I don't want to get older because I don't feel older. Like
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I there's probably something to embracing and flowing with it because there's nothing we could do. We're all getting older anyway. But
It's true. It's true.
so just that, like sort of flow feeling, and then maybe being excited about the possibilities. Sometimes all I see is like the dark and stormy, or like, there's
Yeah.
problems ahead, but there's definitely a lot of possibilities and good things coming, right? So, when you see clients, when they come
Mm.
to you as like, they're women in midlife. Tell me a few like, things. Does this sound familiar to you, what I'm talking about? Or,
Sure.
are there common themes and patterns that you see with the people that you coach? And
Absolutely.
so
Well,
let's talk about like just common things. So I think we all don't feel so alone in our struggles.
sure. Well, one, the realization of our bodies aging, right? The wrinkles, the saggy skin, like that physical component, but also just feeling older, even if emotionally I feel young. I notice some of the physical, and I think my clients are noticing those things too. And I don't always embrace that I'm aging, but I'm learning to accept it. And I guess that is my hope, to help my clients get to that place too, that an acceptance of, yes, sometimes it feels really hard. And how can I approach this from a more compassionate mindset? Like, how can I give myself some grace when it does feel hard, but also get excited about the potential for what is next? I think for some women, it's grandchildren, this new generation that comes into their lives. I have not had that experience, but I see how fulfilling that can be at this part of, this time in their lives and in our life. But for me personally, it was like, well, now I have this opportunity to do other things, well, fortunate, I feel fortunate in that, I'm at a place where I can travel, or I can, you know, take time off and do things that I want to do. But for clients, like, I think it's really just helping them better understand sort of those internal messages that we're giving ourselves, like this, you know, hating our bodies or shaming ourselves around where we are right now, versus, can I offer myself some compassion for, one, if this feels really hard, but two, just knowing that there are others out there that are going through the same thing. I think that this is a common experience, that I think that can be really helpful too. But it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, looking for values. Like, what is it that you want with this part of your life now, you know?
I think yeah, feeling like you're not alone, especially at this time of our lives when it can feel kind of lonely because we're not, I know, again, for me, like I'm not like so bond, like I made a lot of my friends through my kids, like through,
Right.
right, those moms. And now we're all sort of scattered or we're all different, doing different things. And
Yeah.
It can sometimes feel, yeah, lonely or like you're alone, like you're kind of doing this alone.
Yes.
So I think to that, that's important. And then you said another thing about feeling out of control, like our bodies, like our bodies are changing so much. I know for me, with some of my clients, that, when you have been dieting or like controlling your body for decades through diets, through whatever, severe, or like maybe not so severe, but then you go through menopause. And that's a huge body shift. I mean, right? Even with all the best intentions, I mean, how your weight is distributed, it's, maybe you've gained a little more weight in your belly, and that can feel really, really shocking sometimes,
Yes.
to some women, and very, very hard change.
Absolutely.
And then I think, then you just mentioned the word compassion, and I think to really double down on trying to have some compassion for yourself and for the changes you're going through. But that can feel hard
And
when you've been in control, and then you feel like you cannot control the physical, at least part of your life.
hmm
Does that
well,
make sense? Have
and
you seen that
it
with
totally, oh, it makes so much sense. Yeah. Well, but two, I just want to say, like, it's the illusion of control, right? I mean, yes, we can diet or, you know, eat in very mindful ways to sort of maintain body weight, but really our body's going to do what it's going to do, right? I mean, and yes, so the shifting, I think, of where we are physically, as you said, like sometimes you have the belly weight, or, your skin doesn't look quite as youthful and glowing as it once did. There are people, I know women who work really hard to continue with that control, right? To whether it's surgical or through hormone replacement, which I think some people need because, menopause can be very disruptive hormonally, but also, plastic surgery, injections, things like there's so much out there that you can do to sort of continue with that illusion of control. But our bodies are going to age inside no matter what we're doing to the outside.
Yeah. Well, society in general doesn't like women getting older, right? And aging.
It's true. It's
We,
true.
I mean, we do resist it on a very huge level.
We do. We
Yeah,
do.
I
But
know, which
that's
is,
been a challenge, I think for a lot of my clients. Yeah, it's just accepting, even with compassion, that maybe their body doesn't look the way it used to or the way they would
mhm,
like it to today.
mhm. So let's talk about that definition of compassion, because we've now thrown it out there a little bit. Tell me what you think of compassion, or what that means to you, to have compassion for yourself
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
woman
Well,
going through midlife and a lot of changes.
yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is how a big piece of that is how you talk to yourself, right? Like, I know for many years, I struggled with anxiety. And as I was learning to sort of listen to my own internal dialogue, realized that I was so unkind to myself. Like, if I made a mistake, I ruminated on it for days afterwards, like, oh, I should have never said that, or I should never have done that. I can remember as a young woman, beating myself up about my parenting, like, oh, I could be so much better if I didn't just, lose my shit on my kids or sorry, excuse
It's
me,
okay.
just get angry or whatever. So I think so much of what we can shift, what we can control is how we talk to ourselves, how we relate to us. That doesn't necessarily mean we're giving ourselves a pass for when we do make mistakes. It's sort of acknowledging nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. So, sort of that common human experience of we all are in this. None of us are perfect. We all struggle from time to time. And yet, can we then acknowledge how hard that is? Like, it feels really hard. And can I offer myself, a hand on my heart or just a little word of encouragement, like, yeah, this feels really hard. And I feel how hard that is, but can I be kind to myself in that?
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, when you're spent like I think a lot of women years beating yourself up, right?
Yeah.
Because that's maybe how you grew up, or that or that's how you're supposed to be.
Mm,
The thought of being kind to yourself, not being hard on yourself is foreign. I mean, I know that I know for myself, that was me years ago. I mean, I grew
yeah.
up in like the land of like diet culture, big diet culture in my family, and just and like gaining weight, losing weight, being hard on myself, having to reprimand myself. And it wasn't until I really learned how to cultivate that self-compassion and kindness that I could finally like lose some weight and lose it and keep it off. I mean, for me, for my clients, for I think in the world of weight loss and just body nutrition, kindness and compassion is everything. It's the missing
Gosh.
link
Yes.
between being on like these punishing diets and just really taking care of yourself.
Mm,
And because you want to get healthy and you want to like, and it's like you're taking care of like your inner child, I guess, you can call it that.
yes.
Or,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. Those parts
so
of you that didn't get the love and care back then. Yeah.
yeah. And so kindness and compassion, I think, are just undervalued, underserved habits
Yeah.
that I
Well,
think
I
we
think
women need to cultivate.
yeah, I think around, yes, diet culture. I think around mental wellness. I think around, um, yeah, our appearance. It's like we're so used to sort of comparing, but also then criticizing. Um, I think a piece of this self-compassion too is that mindful awareness. It's like we are becoming more aware of what we're telling ourselves, how we're treating ourselves. Like I can remember, I don't know if you're familiar with Kristen Neff's work, but she's
Hmm.
so, yeah, that she's
Very.
all about self-compassion. And I remember, hearing her saying, like, would you, like one of her exercises, the way you talk to yourself, would you ever say that to one, to a friend, but two, to a total stranger, somebody you don't know? Would you ever, ever talk that way to them?
Hmm.
And the answer was like, no, why? Of course not. And I was like, oh, right. But it's okay to do that to myself.
Exactly. Why is it okay? Right? You would never think about talking the way you talk to yourself to a good friend. You would never
Yeah. Even
criticize
somebody you
them.
don't like, probably. I mean, maybe you would, but I
Yeah.
am not a hateful person. And yeah, it's just like, wow, how is that okay?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So kindness and compassion, I think, are key, almost like
yeah.
the number one things that you have to have
Well,
as
and yeah, as a self-care tool almost.
as a self-care tool. I think that is, if you want to think of it as like a toolbox of things that you're carrying around with you.
Yeah. And I think one of the hardest parts of that is often people, my clients will say, but if I'm nice to myself, then how am I ever going to get better? How am I ever going to do this better? How am I ever going to actually lose weight or never make a mistake again? And the reality is like we're not perfect, right? We will make another mistake potentially. And if we can relate to ourselves with kindness, whether it's around food and eating or around just life, that actually helps us make change when we can offer that care and kindness. And there's research that shows that.
Yes, there is research, and I love research. So I love science. I love evidence, and there is research to show that is like being kind and compassionate to yourself is much more effective than what you just said. Like that your client said, like if I'm not beating myself up, how am I going to get myself to change? Which as you said that out loud, I'm like, that sounds ridiculous, but that is how I used to be with myself, and that is how many, many women are with
Oh,
with
yeah.
themselves, right? I mean, if they're not hard on themselves, if they're not like beating themselves up,
Yeah.
yeah, you mean I just have to be kind to myself, and that's yes,
Right.
yes, that is so much more effective. It's so much. I think it's so much longer lasting than beating yourself
Hmm.
up. But how do
Hmm.
you get then? So, how do you get your clients to go from like that beating up themselves to really embracing and practicing
Yeah.
compassion and self-kindness?
Well, a lot of, particularly with therapy clients, but coaching clients too, is really looking back at the messaging they received
Hmm.
when, if they were, you know, making mistakes or overeating or not eating healthy food, like what were the caregivers, the support people in your life, what were the messages that you were given, right? Because often what we're telling ourselves is stuff we've internalized from others, right? So it's like, um, having an awareness of kind of repeating the patterns that were set in place back in the day when we were kids. And so being able to meet those, and then, well, and often then I will reflect to them like, well, is that how if they're parents, is that how you're treating your own children? And they'd be like, no, of course not. Why would I? I would never do that. I was like, all right, so how about, what would it be like to then offer what you give your children or what you give your best friend to yourself? And it can be gentle. It can be, if that feels too hard, like if the idea of being kind to myself feels so difficult that it's almost, it's almost rejected. Like we can't even take that in because for some people that is true. It just feels so foreign or so uncomfortable that I'll say, well, what would a friend say to you right now? Can you internalize that? Or how would if your dog could talk that, loves you to death unconditionally, how would he respond to your suffering? And can you give yourself that? And it could be an inanimate object, or it could be a tree, whatever. But being able to really hear what someone else would say to you when you're struggling and offer that to yourself. And then as that becomes more comfortable, then making it really come from you, from your heart.
Yeah. Starting from like a foundation of kindness and compassion, and then going, it's not that you have to accept like the weight that you're at I mean, right. We don't have to like necessarily accept these things, but if we come at it from this kind and compassionate angle and then look to maybe lose weight or get in better shape or whatever the goal is,
Yeah.
it's just a much better experience. I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
much nicer experience.
Right, right. Well, and I think too, for some people, that they see self-kindness as like a panacea, right? Oh, everything's fine. You're good. No worries. And it's not that, right? It's like it feels really hard that I broke my diet or that I'm not at the weight I want to be. And can I be with how hard that is and offer myself compassion around that? Like, this feels really hard that I'm 10 pounds or whatever it is, that I'm heavier than I want to be. But can I recognize that I'm not alone in this? That I have the choice of how I talk to myself around how hard it is. Like, I could be terrible and tell myself how awful I am for not sticking to this diet. Or I could say, gosh, it's so hard to stay with this diet. And it feels really hard that I'm not where I want to be.
Yeah. Losing weight is hard. It is. It's challenging. It's
Oh my
challenging
gosh.
when we're in midlife where, it can get hard, but let's
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah. Well, and maybe through the self-kindness, there's a weight that you can find that works, that maybe isn't as severe or drastic, that can be a place that you can find comfort in and be okay with, some acceptance around. Like, for me, that's been a challenge in midlife, that yeah, my body is definitely a different shape, and the weight I was probably 10 years ago, I've gained weight, but I recognize to nourish my body in the way I want to, like to feed it so that I get the nutrition I need, but also the enjoyment that I love food. So to get the enjoyment, like, all right, so I'm going to buy some clothes that fit me comfortably now, and I'm okay with that. But yeah, but that took some time to get there. Yeah.
Right. Being okay where you are right now. And
Yeah.
then if
Yeah.
you lose weight, great. I mean, right, but being right, having the acceptance, I think,
Yeah.
of where you are right now is really important. What other things do you see for midlife women um, that are just hot buttons
Yeah.
for you, besides having the self-compassion and the bound, the self-compassion and the kindness. Um,
Hmm.
I was thinking about boundaries
Oh, yeah.
also, yeah, which I know is, a big one for a lot of women, saying yes when you mean to say no. That's been something for me, at least, that has definitely been top of mind for the last couple of years is,
Yeah.
no is a complete sentence and being really okay with that. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
what do you think that that's a big one for women in midlife?
I do. I think that boundaries are a struggle for women in general. I think we are raised to be people pleasers and be the caregivers and take care of others before we take care of our own needs. And, society needs that. And we also can do that, do our caregiving and take care of ourselves too. And so that does mean setting boundaries and saying no. Um, I think what is very hard for many women, especially I am highly sensitive. So, especially for highly sensitive women, is we're so concerned about hurting other people's feelings. We're so worried about how others will feel if I say no. What will happen to that relationship if I set this boundary? And a lot of the work that I do with clients is like allowing them to see that they're sort of twisting to accommodate others really harms themselves and the relationship because then the people in their lives come to expect this sort of selfless energy and you end up feeling depleted, resentful. um, yeah, the relationship doesn't feel reciprocal anymore. And so I do see like helping women find a way to create boundaries that work for them because it's not the same for everybody, but also recognizing sometimes when we begin this process of creating healthier boundaries for ourselves, sometimes some relationships do fall away. And that's really hard. And sometimes it's necessary.
What do you think is behind the lack of boundaries or saying yes when you want to say no? I mean, where does that come from? Something from our past? Is it just we're just born caretakers? And I mean, I know that I'm sure for a lot of women, they feel very useful or
Mhm.
needed or wanted.
Yeah, yeah,
But it
yeah.
is, yeah, I mean, that's just the opposite sometimes of self-care. Where do you think that stems from?
Well, I
Just
think there
so
is,
women can, understand this, like, so
sure.
I think it's important to know where the origins of it
Yeah.
are, right?
Yeah, well, I think there is a big cultural message, at least for women of our generation. Like there's a cultural message around sort of selflessness as being the ideal for women. Like you are the giver, you're the caretaker, you are the yeah, selfless person. And I think religion has something to do with that too, right? Being selfless, helpful people, and being helpful in a caregiver and selfless at times can be lovely, but if we're constantly taking care of other people's needs to the detriment of our own, we end up, well, oftentimes sick. That it can result in like physical illness because we're not taking care of our both our physical and our emotional needs. And so it benefits everybody if we're setting boundaries because one, we're in a better place to take care of the people in our lives that need taking care, because we like to take care of people. Most women, I think, that that may be a genetic component of who we are, but for a lot of people, like if we're, my mom used to always talk about burning the candle at both ends, right? Like if we're just using up all the energy on everybody else, there's nothing left for us. And so then we're not doing whatever caregiving we might want to do coming from a place from our heart, right? It's coming out
Yeah.
of obligation or resentment or even anger.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be good with yourself first. I mean, physically, mentally, right? Rested, all the self-care things before you can take care of others.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I think that's
And
where the boundaries come in. And some women can, I guess, can think that it feels very selfish, but it's really
yes.
self-care.
Yes. Yes, yes. And I think that sort of that idea that taking care of yourself is selfish, like I don't know. There were times in my life where I would get so angry at my husband because it was so easy for him just to be like, "Well, I'm going to go whatever, play golf or whatever it was, right? I'm going to go hang out with my friends." And I'd be like, how do you just like do that without worrying about what everybody else is thinking? I'm like, well,
Right.
wow, what a great place to be, right? Where I can not to hurt other people, but to just say, this is what I need right now. And so, yes, so
Yeah. It
it
feels so
can be,
foreign.
it does.
Right.
And it takes practice. I mean, that's the other thing is to be better at um, holding your boundaries, it takes practice putting them in place. And sometimes we're
Yeah.
good at it and sometimes we're not. And having compassion with ourselves when we say yes to something we really didn't want to do, and say, whoops, that
Yeah.
was not my best moment, but next time I will learn from this and be better.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think any other keys? I mean, I think we talked about boundaries, self-care, compassion, kindness. What else
Yeah.
did we talk about? Just, the just changes going on in midlife. Any other key, takeaways for women in midlife? Just to, I think these are all like good talking points, or just all like these kind of buzzwords to
Yeah. Yeah.
focus on.
Yeah.
What else do you see? Anything else that's we didn't
Well,
cover?
the one thing I like to share with clients too, or just, to live. It's like change is possible for us no matter where we are in our life, right? No matter what age, what stage. We have an opportunity to make changes if we choose to. And also, obviously, if we have the resources to do that. But even that change can be internal change, right? It doesn't have to be physical. Like I don't necessarily mean you can move or change careers, but you can shift how you relate to yourself and how you relate to others at any time in your life. Those changes are possible.
That's very good, wise words. Maybe
Thanks.
to end. So I mean, I think that's yeah. I mean, change is possible. We're not stuck where we are,
Right.
even if we might be in a job that we can't just leave or a physical
Yeah.
location, geographic location. We have the power, right, in us to
Yeah.
even just internally make changes.
Yeah.
And that's really important. Biz, thank you very much. I wanted to just share with my audience, how do they get in touch with you if they want to reach out and maybe
Yeah.
do some more
Right.
work with you?
Perfect. So I am a therapist that's licensed in Maryland and Delaware, and my website for that is progressioncounseling.com. So you can find me there. But I am also, like I said, a life coach. Coach feels like an awfully strong word, but a guide, a mentor for highly sensitive women. And you can find that at elizabethcush.com. And Cush is spelled with a C. Often AI just turns my last name into Kush, but it's not. But yeah, you can find me in both places. I don't know when this episode will air, but I just began offering sort of a meetup for highly sensitive women at a very moderate price. We'll meet virtually March 14th, Eastern Time, 12:15, and that's open right now for registration if people are interested. And if this goes live after that, I'm going to be offering those more often, and you can get on my mailing list and find out more.
Okay, great. So this is an ongoing.
It will be.
meeting.
Yes.
Okay, but you're
Yes.
starting March 14th. Okay, great.
Yep.
Let
Yep.
me just ask you before we end. I know you've mentioned highly sensitive people or highly sensitive women. Just
Yes.
give me a sentence about that. How do you define someone who's highly sensitive?
Yeah. So, being highly sensitive is actually like a genetic trait. It is something we're born with. And so, as a highly sensitive person, you take in sensory information at a sort of a deeper level than the average person. So, it could be, so through your five senses, you may smell things more distinctly. Bad odors may impact you more powerfully. Hearing, like sound, could be, if you're in a really loud place, that can be overwhelming. Bright lights, lots of colors, lots of people. As highly sensitive women, you may find that you get overwhelmed by environmental stimulus more easily than the average person. You may have heard growing up, you're just too sensitive. You need to get over it. You feel too much. You shouldn't feel so much. Yeah. So if you can recall hearing those things as a kid, you can go to, I think it's called, I think the website is hsperson.com. Elaine Aaron is the one who's done a lot of the research, but there's like a little self quiz that you can take that highlights the points where, it identifies whether you're highly sensitive or not. And it shows up differently for each person, what you're more sensitive to. But it's another area where if we can find compassion for our sensitivities, it helps us live in the world in a much more easeful way.
Right. Okay. So having acceptance. So for example, if my husband is chewing something crunchy and that drives me crazy, is
Yes.
that
Yeah.
kind of
Absolutely.
making a joke, but I know,
Yeah.
I mean, because some of those things can drive me really crazy, and I think I'm highly sensitive to things,
Probably.
yeah, things like
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, no, I understand that the highly sensitive traits, and so that's good to understand. I'm glad I asked you that right at the slip
Yes.
that
Me
in
too.
before we ended. So, Biz, thank you so much. This is a great conversation, and I think my
Yeah.
audience will have a lot to work with.
Yeah. And I just want to say, too, I have a podcast as well. It's the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. People can find me there and on Instagram at Awaken Your Wise Woman. So there you go. All the
Great.
places.
I will put all of
Awesome.
those links in the show notes so people
Thank you,
can
Heather.
get that all through there. Okay,
Awesome.
great. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
And as always, if you loved this podcast, please consider gifting me with a 5-star review. It is so helpful for me to get the word out on real eating, our real bodies, and real food stories. Thank you so much and have a great week. Bye for now.